Okay, think back to the last time you took a multiple choice test. You know that sudden universal panic of realizing you just bubbled in 3 C's in a row on your Scantron? Yeah, we've all been there. You hand it in, and soon enough, you receive an instant, quantifiable grade, a crisp 8 out of 10 or 100%. It's an experience we are all intimately familiar with. But what you might not realize is that this very familiar moment is actually a perfect real-world example of a major educational theory in action. So welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to unpack the fascinating, highly structured world of behaviorism and how it completely redefines the way we measure learning. To mirror the highly structured methods behaviorists themselves champion, here's our path today. The measurable mind, philosophy of the observable, purpose of assessment, tools of the trade, strengths and limitations, and finally, beyond observable behavior. Let's get right into it. Part 1. The measurable mind. If behavior can be observed, it can be measured, shaped, and controlled. This quote right here, this is essentially the core behaviorist mantra. In this perspective, the mind itself is treated like a literal black box. Behaviorists deliberately ignore what's happening inside that box: your private thoughts, your shifting emotions, your internal meaning-making. Why? Well, simply because they can't see it. Instead, they focus strictly on the inputs going in and the outputs coming out. The premise is simple but incredibly powerful. If an action can be observed, it can be measured. And if it can be measured, it can be controlled. So, behaviorism defines learning strictly as a change in observable behavior caused by external stimuli. Think about it like this. If a teacher says pencils down and you immediately stop writing, that observable physical action is the learning. It's not about how stressed you feel about the test or your internal anxiety. It's entirely about that external stimulus and your physical response. Moving on to part 2, philosophy of the observable. Now, to understand why behaviorists only care about what they can physically see, we really have to look at the strict philosophical rules driving them. The foundation starts with empiricism. Imagine your mind on your very first day of kindergarten as a completely blank slate, a tabula rasa. According to empiricism, learning is simply the accumulation of external sensory experiences that write upon that slate over time. But behaviorism takes this a step further by applying positivism. Positivism acts as a harsh, strict filter. It dictates that only publicly observable, measurable phenomena are considered valid knowledge. It completely rejects introspection. Like, if you simply tell a teacher, "I understand this concept," a positivist will literally cross their arms and say, "Prove it on paper in a way I can measure." Subjective internal interpretations, they just don't count as valid data here. And this illustrates the Great Divide perfectly. Positivism fully accepts the raised hand, the written essay, the standardized test score. These are verifiable by multiple outside observers. But that private aha moment, the internal feeling of confusion, because an external observer cannot directly see or measure your internal feelings, behaviorism deliberately locks those right out of the equation. Section 3. The purpose of assessment. So how does this actually translate into the classroom? Well, if learning is defined entirely as a change in behavior, then assessment is the only objective evidence that learning has actually occurred. Without assessment, a behaviorist has absolutely no way to know if their teaching worked. It isn't just a little add-on at the end of a unit. Assessment is the very bridge between the teaching and the proof of learning. Here is the continuous engine in motion. We start with a clear, measurable objective. Then the teacher provides the stimulus, say a question. You act, providing the response. Instantly, that action is assessed. Feedback reinforces the correct move, and boom, we have a predictable behavior change. Assessment is embedded right there in the middle, constantly driving this continuous loop. Now, there's a subtle but absolutely critical distinction we need to make here. Feedback is just information about performance. Well, actually, think of it like a gamified learning app flashing a red incorrect on your screen. That's just feedback. Reinforcement, which was coined by thinkers like B.F. Skinner, is a consequence that actually changes the likelihood of that behavior happening again. Feedback only truly becomes reinforcement when it actively influences your future behavior, whether that's through the reward of a digital badge or the correction of a mistake. Part 4. Tools of the trade. To measure these responses in the real world, behaviorists rely on those objective tools we all grew up with: the multiple choice bubbles, true or false statements, fill in the blanks, and highly structured behavioral checklists. Because of that strict positivist rule we talked about, these tools entirely eliminate subjective grading. You are definitely not going to find open-ended essays or creative portfolios here. There is only one correct answer, and it is ruthlessly observable. And performance is measured purely through quantitative metrics. It's all about achieving 100% accuracy. It's about tracking the sheer speed of a response or counting the exact number of correct answers. The goal is always to produce measurable, hard numerical data that proves, without a doubt, that the behavioral objective was met. Which brings us to Part 5, Strengths and Limitations. The merits of this highly efficient system are honestly undeniable. It offers incredibly clear, structured teaching. Outcomes are exceptionally easy to measure, and it's fantastic for building basic habits and skill mastery. But wow, the trade-offs are pretty severe. By design, it completely ignores internal thinking processes. It limits creativity because there's only one right response, and it can create a heavy dependence on external praise and rewards, failing entirely to measure deep conceptual understanding. Finally, Part 6, Beyond Observable Behavior. The main takeaway here is actually a really fascinating paradox. In behaviorism, assessment is the primary tool through which learning is measured, shaped, and reinforced. But the very thing that makes it so strong, its absolute, uncompromising objectivity, is also its greatest limitation. It perfectly evaluates measurable, mechanical tasks, but it intentionally leaves out the rich, invisible processes of the human mind. Which leaves us with this final thought. If we build our educational systems to only assess what we can publicly observe and measure on a checklist or a multiple-choice test, what kind of brilliant, hidden understanding are we leaving behind in the unmeasurable depths of the human mind? It's a huge question, and one that naturally leads us to wonder how other educational theories might step in to measure the unmeasurable. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the way we learn.